Have you ever had that little nagging feeling when reading certain texts? That quiet voice sort of questioning if the standard explanation really lines up with what seems, well, obvious.
Yeah, that feeling like your own gut instinct might be onto something important.
Exactly. And if that sounds familiar, then this deep dive might just be for you.
Indeed. Today we're jumping into a really fascinating perspective from the book The Surprising Many or the Rare Few by True Christian Press.
And we're tackling a big topic, the timing of New Testament prophecies.
It's something that often creates a bit of a disconnect for people, I think, a real head scratcher sometimes.
Right. So our mission today is really to explore this fresh perspective, see if it offers, compelling answers to those questions you might have had.
Questions like, why do words like soon, near, and this generation in the Bible often get interpreted in ways that suggest, well, not soon?
Exactly. We're looking at this book's argument that maybe your own inner detective was actually onto something from the start.
Okay, so let's start with an analogy the book uses, which I think is brilliant. The Emperor's New Clothes.
Ah, yeah,
He
classic.
uses it to talk about how traditional theology has sometimes woven these pretty elaborate theories about prophecies being delayed, like invisible clothes everyone pretends to see.
And that's where you, the listener, might connect. Maybe you felt like that kid in the story, reading the text and thinking,
Hang on, but it says it would happen soon.
precisely. That feeling of just pointing out the obvious. This deep dive is about validating that perception, exploring if that simple reading holds up.
Which brings us nicely to what the book terms the Great Soon Conspiracy, the case of the missing urgency.
Conspiracy sounds dramatic, but it highlights a real tension, doesn't it?
It really does. Because when you read the New Testament writers, Paul, James, Peter, John, the sense of urgency is, well, it's hard to miss. It feels immediate.
It really does. It's almost like reading a breaking news report.
Yeah.
You've got Paul saying the time is short.
And James putting it even more starkly. The judge is standing at the door.
Then Peter warns, the end of all things has drawn near. I mean, these aren't vague terms.
Not at all. And John echoes it too. The time is near. If you're just writing that plainly, you'd assume something was about to happen, well, soon.
But that's where the conflict comes in, right? The traditional approach often suggests soon doesn't really mean soon, or maybe it's symbolic, or it's on God's timescale, which is different.
Exactly. And the book tackles that head on. It asks, how does that interpretation really sit with a straightforward reading? It can feel like you're being told not to trust your own understanding of simple words.
So does the book address that God's time versus our time argument directly? Because that's a common one.
It does. It argues that while God's perspective on time is vast, when specific time-sensitive words like soon or near are used in prophecy directed to people in their time, they have to mean something relevant to them.
Otherwise, what's the point of using those words?
Right. The book suggests the authors had other Greek words they could have used if they meant eventually or sometime in the distant future. They chose words implying imminence.
Okay, that makes sense. It preserves the integrity of the language being used.
And this focus on plain language gets even sharper when we get to Jesus' own words. The book calls this bit the "this generation shall game."
Yes. Matthew 24. Jesus says very clearly, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place.
Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? You'd naturally think this generation means, well, the people alive right then listening to him.
That's the immediate intuitive reading, for sure, but then you encounter interpretations that try to shift this generation to mean something else entirely.
Yeah, like maybe it refers to the Jewish people throughout history or maybe a future generation that sees certain signs. It gets complicated.
And the book points out the absurdity, like saying, I'll see you tomorrow, but meaning maybe in 2,000 years. It puts a real strain on the language.
It really does. It makes you question why such a simple phrase would be used if it meant something so non-obvious.
Okay, so we have the urgency issue, this generation issue. Where does the book go next to support this idea that your intuition might be right?
It moves to the book of Revelation, and specifically to how John talks about the temple. This is what the book calls a potential smoking gun.
Because John writes about it like it's still there.
Exactly. Many readers notice this. He describes the second temple altar, people measuring the temple, worshipers in the temple.
Wow. Okay, so specific physical details.
Very specific. He mentions the altar again, the outer court, the holy city being trampled, the great city where our Lord was crucified, which sounds a lot like Jerusalem.
And even destruction within that city, right? An earthquake killing thousands.
Yes, 7,000 men, specifically.
Yeah.
And all this leads up to the arrival of God's kingdom. The descriptions are grounded in the physical reality of the temple complex.
So the obvious question arises. The temple was destroyed in 70 CE. If John was writing decades later, say in the 90 CE, as traditionally thought, why describe it as if it's operational?
That's the crux of it. The book argues this strongly suggests John was writing before 70 CE, when the temple was still standing. It fits the internal evidence much more naturally.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant point. It flips the common dating on its head.
It does, and it lines up with the urgency we talked about earlier. If Revelation was written before 70 CE, its prophecies about judgment and upheaval could relate directly to the impending destruction of Jerusalem.
Okay, that connects a lot of dots. But what about this generation time frame? How does 70 CE fit?
Well, the book brings in another historical event, what it calls the Bar Kokhba aha moment.
The Bar Kokhba revolt. That was later, wasn't it?
Yes, 132 to 136 CE. It was this massive final attempt by Jewish forces to rebuild the temple and restore the nation after the 70 CE destruction.
Yeah.
It failed catastrophically.
And that marked the definitive end of that era, the Second Jewish Commonwealth.
Right. So the book proposes an interesting calculation. If you count from Jesus' ministry starting around 30 CE to the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 136 CE.
Let's see, that's about 106 years.
Exactly. Roughly 100 years. Which, the book argues, fits perfectly well within the ancient understanding of a generation, not just parents to children, but a longer historical lifespan or age.
So this generation wouldn't necessarily mean only the people standing there, but that whole era culminating in the final end of the temple-centric system around 136 CE.
That's the perspective presented. It gives a concrete historical boundary to Jesus' words, making this generation refer to that whole period of judgment on that specific covenant age.
That's a different way of looking at it, connecting it to a longer historical arc, but still a defined one.
It keeps the fulfillment within a plausible time frame related to Jesus' audience and the events surrounding the temple's demise.
Okay. So timing, temple references this generation. What about other symbols, like the really famous one, 666?
Yes, the 666 detective story, as the book puts it. Everyone thinks Nero, right?
That's the common association, definitely. Though getting the math to work often involves some creative interpretation of names and titles.
It can, but the book offers a completely different angle, rooted directly in the Old Testament.
Oh, where does it point?
To 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9. These passages explicitly state the amount of gold King Solomon received annually.
Okay, and that amount was?
Exactly, 666 talents of gold, about 25 tons annually.
Wow, 666 talents of gold. So the number isn't necessarily about a person's name, but wealth.
Specifically, the book argues it points to corrupted Jewish leadership and Second Temple wealth. Solomon's reign started godly but ended in excess and idolatry, fueled by that immense wealth. The number became symbolic of that kind of corruption within the leadership tied to the temple system.
That actually makes a lot of sense contextually. If Revelation is focused on judging the corrupted temple system,
Then a number symbolizing immense, potentially corrupting temple-related wealth fits perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
No complex math needed, just a direct biblical reference.
yeah, it fits the theme. Revelation is soaked in Jewish imagery, Old Testament references.
Written to churches in Asia Minor, a heavily Jewish-influenced region.
Dealing with issues like pressure to conform to local religious practices, which often involved the Jewish authorities at the time.
And if it's about the end of the Jewish age, fulfilled in the Jewish wars, it all starts to click together. The focus is consistently Jewish.
It's like all the evidence points in the same direction.
The book certainly argues that way. And there's one more piece from Jesus himself, a parable that seems to lay out the timeline.
Which parable is that?
Matthew 22, the parable of the wedding feast.
Okay, refresh my memory on the sequence there.
So first, the king sends out his servants to invite guests. The book aligns this with the apostles' initial ministry.
Makes sense. Then what happens?
The invitees refuse, and some even kill the messengers. This aligns with the persecution the apostles and early Christians faced, particularly from certain groups like the Sadducees and Zealots mentioned in the book.
Right, that persecution is well documented. What's the king's reaction in the parable?
He gets angry. He sends his armies to destroy those murderers and crucially burn their city.
Burn their city. That sounds familiar, like the judgment on Jerusalem.
Exactly. And then, only after the judgment and the burning of the city, does the king say, okay, now go find other guests. The wedding feast is ready. The feast begins after the judgment.
Wow. Okay. And how does that connect to Revelation?
Think about Revelation 19. When does the marriage supper of the Lamb happen?
It happens right after the fall of Babylon.
Right after Babylon the Great is judged and destroyed. If Babylon in Revelation symbolizes first century Jerusalem, as many argue given the context we've discussed, then this sequence is identical.
City destroyed, then marriage feast begins.
It's a perfect match. Jesus' own parable timeline seems to mirror the timeline in Revelation, placing the start of the marriage supper, often seen as the church age or the messianic age fully inaugurated after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE.
That coherence is pretty stunning, actually, between the parable and Revelation.
It ties a lot of threads together using Jesus' own words as the key.
So looking back at all this, the urgency, the generation, the temple 666, the parable, it feels like it builds a really strong case.
The book argues it leads to this moment of, let's call it the great validation. That feeling you might have had, that intuitive sense that the timing statements meant what they said.
That maybe your simple reading wasn't so simple, but actually accurate.
Exactly. That maybe you were reading it right all along. If Jesus said, this generation, maybe he meant that generation in the sense we discussed.
If the apostles wrote with such urgency, maybe things really were urgent and imminent for them.
If John described the temple like it was still there, maybe it was still there when he wrote.
The timing statements seem specific for a reason.
And the book points out this beautiful irony. Sometimes, complex theological systems built around delayed fulfillment can make people doubt the Bible's straightforwardness.
Yeah, you start thinking, well, it says soon, but it doesn't mean soon, so what else doesn't mean what it says?
Exactly. But this perspective, seeing the prophecies fulfilled within that first century context, actually restores confidence. It suggests the Bible was incredibly precise.
God said soon and meant soon. Jesus said this generation, and events unfolded within that time frame. The apostles were urgent because judgment was at the door. John saw a standing temple because it was standing.
It paints a picture of incredible divine accuracy.
So how does understanding this change things for, the listener living now? What does it mean to be a perceptive Christian with this view?
Well, there's a certain satisfaction, isn't there, in seeing the coherence. It means you're perhaps no longer primarily waiting for biblical prophecy to be fulfilled, at least not the bulk of those specific end times prophecies.
Because they were fulfilled.
They were fulfilled, the book argues, exactly when the Bible indicated they would be. The end times weren't the end of the world, but the end of the Old Covenant age, the end of the temple system.
So we're living after that transition, in the established kingdom that arrived then.
That's the implication. Living in the age of the fulfilled New Covenant, the age of the Messiah's reign, which began definitively with the end of the old system.
And it reinforces that you don't need to be a scholar with complex theories to understand basic words like soon or near.
Right. God's communication was clear. As Hebrews 10.37 says, quoting Habakkuk, "For yet in a very little while he who is coming will come and will not delay." The book argues that promise was kept precisely on schedule.
So the big takeaway here, the sort of reveal at the end,
Is that if you've had these thoughts, these questions, these hang on a minute moments reading the New Testament's timing statements,
you're not crazy.
you're not a heretic for wondering.
Not at all. Many thoughtful Christians, as the book The Surprising Many, or The Rare Few, highlights, have arrived at similar conclusions just by reading carefully. You were essentially being that child pointing out the emperor's lack of clothes.
Your simple, straightforward reading might have been more accurate than elaborate systems designed to explain away the obvious timing. So here's the final thought to leave you with, something to mull over. You always suspected something significant should have happened back then based on those texts.
And according to this perspective, something died. A monumental shift occurred, exactly as predicted. Read your Bible with renewed confidence. Your instincts might have been biblical all along, your questions were valid, and perhaps your conclusions were correct.